What is a ghost? That single question gave rise to one of the most unusual, most well-documented cases of ghostly communication that we have on record. It gave rise to an experiment so compelling it was replicated multiple times, and results so very strange yet so real, it was pretty undeniable those conducting the experiment had succeeded in their efforts. But while the experiment may have offered answers to its participants, for some of us, it only deepened the mystery. Today we are talking about a ghost. Kind of. But not just any ghost. This is the ghost of a man who never lived, a spirit born not of death, but imagination. In the 1970s, members of a parapsychological research group in Toronto, Ontario, set out specifically to prove ghosts were not spirits of the deceased, but creations of the mind. So they invented one. And then, he showed up. Welcome back to the Paranorm Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. When we are considering the paranormal, it's all too easy to believe that we are just observers of it, that we are standing on the outside looking in at something strange, something unknown. But what if we're not just observing bystanders? What if we're participants? What if our belief, our expectation, is the culprit behind the phenomena we've been trying to understand? Today we are talking about a paranormal experiment held 50 years ago. It didn't happen in a haunted house, but a well-lit, controlled environment. It didn't involve priests or possessions or portals to another dimension. It involved normal, everyday people, a fabricated story, and a willingness to believe that a ghost could be manufactured. We are discussing the Philip experiment. On the heels of an investigation of a haunting, Dr. A.R.G. Owen and his wife, Iris, had a discussion regarding the nature of ghosts. What caused them? What were the features of a haunting? What was a ghost, even? Dr. Owen, who was an expert on poltergeist phenomena, considered the accepted theory at the time that poltergeist activity was the result of the mind or minds of the afflicted, and wondered if perhaps the same could be said for ghosts. Were they but a creation of the mind? And if so, could one be created on purpose during a controlled scientific study? And furthermore, could an actual apparition of one be manifested? Dr. Owen had a background in genetics and mathematics, lecturing on both, and his wife Iris was a nurse. Two solid, science-based, logical foundations for these folks. Well, both of them also had an interest in the deeper mysteries of our reality, and prior to their immigration to Canada, had become members of the Society for Psychical Research and the American counterpart. In 1970, Dr. Owen was invited to undertake parapsychological research for the New Horizons Research Foundation in Toronto, and shortly after moving province-side, would establish the Toronto Society for Psychical Research in order to further the science-based exploration of psi and paranormal events already established by the SPR. This is all just to set the stage for just how logical yet open-minded these researchers were. So, back to their proposed experiment. Recruitment began for their ghost creation group. Initially, they would start out with a much bigger group than they would wind up with by the end due to folks dropping out. But the core group consisted of 8 members. Al, a heating engineer and small business owner, Lorne, an industrial designer and astronomer with an artistic flair, Andy, Lorne's wife, also with an artistic flair. It would be her who would ultimately put Philip's face to paper. Bernice, an accountant, Dorothy, a housewife and bookkeeper, Sydney, the youngest of the group, was at the time a sociology student. Sue, who would be the one to put Philip's backstory together, she was a mother of 3. And the chairman of Mensa for Canada. Smart lady. And, of course, Iris Owen, wife of Dr. Owen and author of the authoritative book on the Philip experiment titled Conjuring Up Philip. Dr. Owen, while not considered one of the main group, would be the supervisor of the entire experiment and would be a constant presence. Under the Owens' direction, this group began to meet weekly to meditate together and build rapport and trust amongst each other. Initially, their meetings were a sustained attempt at summoning an apparition from thin air with little foresight as to how it might appear or whether it could be done via collective hallucination or otherwise. After some time, with not much activity to write home about, their efforts were refocused, and the group decided they needed to specify a source for their desired activity if they were going to make any headway. They needed to zero in on their collective intention. And so began in earnest the creation of Philip from scratch. They gave him a backstory, a personality, which would be more fully fleshed out as the experiment went on. They even gave him a portrait. Philip Aylesford was a 17th century English nobleman. He lived at Diddington Manor, served in the military, and had fallen in love with a beautiful gypsy named Margot. But tragedy struck. When his RBF wife discovered the affair, she accused Margot of being a witch and stealing her husband. She didn't even like him that much. Jealous much? Philip, afraid he would lose everything, didn't make a peep during the trial, and Margot, convicted of witchcraft, burned at the stake. Philip, filled with remorse and guilt for not having defended his lover, took to pacing the battlements of Diddington in despair until one morning, when his body was discovered at the foot of them, having thrown himself to an early death. It's said once every 100 years, his ghost makes an appearance to haunt the grounds of his tragic love affair and untimely death. It's a sad, romantic, gothic tale, the perfect ghost story. The group continued their meditations, now drilling in on their Philip story, memorizing every word, familiarizing themselves with features of the time he would have lived, convincing themselves further and further that their creation had a sense of reality, even if it did not. That should do the trick, they thought. But it didn't. No group hallucination appeared, no shared activity to be reported. The group faithfully attempted in vain for a year, dudes, to establish this contact with their imaginary character, and they were becoming discouraged, which is understandable. If there was anything to this ghost creation theory, something had to give. Finally, the Owens looked to the techniques of British psychologist Kenneth Batcheldor, who had previously held similar experiments in the 60s and had been quite successful. Batcheldor was intrigued by the concept of table tipping from the spiritualism movement's seance heyday, though he was under no illusion that there was some mysterious, mystical connection with the other side being the cause of this kind of activity. Instead, Batcheldor would discover that the kind of PK activity, psychokinetic activity, that he was after could be achieved by totally regular folks with zero psychic abilities or inclinations, so long as they were working together toward the same purpose and the environment was right. Over the course of his couple hundred table tipping sessions and numerous revisions of intention and environment, he would successfully demonstrate that this phenomena could be produced by the state of mind of the group rather than by some spirit working through a medium, and theorized it to be a real, not yet understood, physical ability and skill that could be acquired by just about anyone. Batcheldor and co. would successfully establish raps, knocks, table tilts, and had even documented levitation. Based on his research, he concluded the ideal conditions under which this activity could be more easily produced included sessions taking place in dark or dim lighting, positive attitudes being maintained by all participants, and he held that the belief that activity would take place was crucial to success. Some of the practices he listed that promoted success in these sessions included retaining the same sitter's location and table, choosing conditions that were set apart from everyday life, increasing the difficulty of the PK tasks incrementally, and reading and talking about PK by participants. For his part, belief bred further belief, which bred expectation, which led to success, which facilitated further success. And doubt, held by anyone in the group, would be the main hindrance. The Owen group, while they did not adopt the dim to dark lighting suggestion, they did take a page out of Bacheldor's book and change some of their tactics. Rather than quiet meditation, the group started all of their new sessions out with an informal discussion period, trying to establish an easygoing, jovial atmosphere that would have been common at traditional seances. While sitting around a table, fingers lightly placed on its surface, they chatted about Philip, told jokes, sang songs, recited poetry, and in so doing, relaxed and dropped their defenses and any unconscious doubts. And within just a few sessions of adopting these new features, quite unexpectedly one night, they all felt a vibration from within the tabletop, which would be followed by soft raps as the session continued, and would become undeniably loud before the night was over, all seeming to come from the table itself. Shocked at actually getting something after a year of trying, they were all the more startled when the table began to move. Have you ever played with a Ouija board and received communication? You know that nagging doubt in your mind when you think the other person is definitely moving it? Yeah, okay. It was no different for the group. They questioned whether one of the others, even involuntarily, was pushing the table. But it was raised that if that were the case, why, in the entire previous year, had the table not so much as creaked with an oopsie push? Why only once the approach had drastically changed? As the table's movements continued, growing far more swift, almost violent, sliding across the floor, damn near dragging these people behind it, the group grew satisfied in at least believing that none of them was the cause of the movement. It was being caused by something else. And it was fairly easy to rule out a member creating the raps for the same reasoning, but also, again, they were in all full light. It would have been very easy to suss out someone, kicking or hitting the table. In all of the hubbub and flurry, within the cacophony of, are you doing it? No, well, I'm not doing it. Are you doing it? Jesus, why are we running? I've got heels on, damn it. One voice piped above the rest. I wonder if by chance Philip is doing this. And a quick, loud, assertive rang out on the tabletop. There was no doubt. Philip was finally on the other end of the line. Now that they had finally established contact, they quickly came up with a way to maintain it. They decided early on to keep questions to yes-no answers. 1 rap for yes, 2 for no. Assigning a letter to its corresponding number of knocks would have taken far too long, and God forbid Philip didn't know how to spell something. Session starts, half hour in. Cat? 2 knocks. Is that 2 knocks for no or for B? Oh God, what is going on? Yeah, so 1 for yes, 2 for no. They also decided as a group that unless it was made abundantly clear that it was being created by something else, these communications were coming from Philip. So, with this in mind, the sessions proceeded, and the communications with their ghost commenced. They asked him questions about his life, about history, about the details they'd created for him, and the number for the correct answer responded every time. Well, not every time. We'll get to that in a moment. Philip's personality really began to reveal itself via the raps and answers, but also the movement of the table. When the group would sing what had been established to be a favorite song of his, the table could be seen dancing or hopping, tipping up on one side. On multiple occasions, it would slide quickly, blocking a group member into a corner, or fly excitedly across the room to greet a latecomer. Often, a rapping on the table's surface would loudly beat the tempo to a song. When a joke was told that Philip found funny, quick, steady rapping could be heard, almost like a laugh, a chuckle. With Philip's help and willingness to communicate, the group expanded on the details of his life and story, and him as a person, his likes, his dislikes, when he was feeling playful, when he was feeling shy, and they discovered when he was reluctant to answer a question or didn't know the answer by a scratching that suddenly manifested. They also could know Philip was displeased by the scratching, or the table tilting aggressively, toward them. They also discovered that Philip had favorites in the group. Sidney, the youngest, had garnered Philip's adoration along with Dr. Owen, who later on, as the experiment progressed, didn't even have to place hands on the table to communicate. Everyone else had to have hands touching this table to be acknowledged by the ghost, but Philip would answer Dr. Owen with his raps, even if he was across the room. So, communication was now rolling. They had a system going, and it was firing on all cylinders. Pew, pew, pew. Now, for the entirety of this experiment, it was never forgotten by the members that Philip was their creation. He was not an intelligent, discarnate entity. Something that was accepted by the group regarding communication was that no matter what information was received from Philip, it was expected that his answers were going to align with the story they had set for him or the general knowledge and agreements of the members of the group. Which makes sense. If a ghost is the product of someone's mind, so too its limitations and knowledge should, in theory, have the same limitations of the mind that created it. Right? On a couple of occasions, Philip was noted to answer definitively, adamantly, and correctly something that the group did not know or disagreed with him about. Iris wrote about this moment in particular where Dr. Owen had popped into the room and was kind of lingering at the doorway. The group had been asking about some of the people of Philip's time that he might have known, and Dr. Owen pipes up, "Did you know Elizabeth, the Winter Queen?" One rap responded from the table for yes. "That's odd," Dr. Owen would say. "He says he knew Elizabeth, and yet previously he said he never knew Rupert, her brother-in-law." The group and Dr. Owen had previously asked Philip whether he knew Elizabeth's brother-in-law, Prince Rupert, both historical, real figures. Dr. Owen proceeds to continue asserting Rupert's brother-in-law relationship with Elizabeth, but Philip, via sturdy double raps, continues saying no, no, no. Finally, Dr. Owen is like, "You know what? I'm going to go look it up in the encyclopedia. Then we'll see who has the final say, Philip." Bringing him them big dogs with that encyclopedia, Doc. The 70s. Well, you already know where this is going, but Rupert, as Doc Owen would discover, was definitely not Elizabeth's brother-in-law. Prince Rupert was actually her son. Now, how is that possible? It shouldn't be. Everyone was certain of the information that Philip was denying. He was supposed to answer in the way they expected him to, but refused. I almost missed that occurrence in the book. Iris writes it so nonchalantly. I think it's a little more profound than that, Iris. I do think it's a clue. Now, when the experiment was still in its infancy, the group had been meeting in the various members' homes, using their tables and whatnot. So, one of the other changes the group had decided to incorporate from Bacheldor's suggestions was to pick a place outside of their regular environments and somewhere they could meet consistently for their purpose. It was decided after the new sessions of 1973 had begun, just a few sessions in, it was time to do that. Moving forward, all meetups with Philip would take place in his new permanent home at the Society's headquarters, a room ultimately dubbed Philip's Room. It was reserved only for Philip sessions and was completely off limits to all other society activities. The group had most recently been meeting at Al's apartment and using his card table. And right before making the move to the new spot, they had communicated to Philip about the move and that they wanted him to meet them over at the headquarters the following week. Well, Philip wasn't entirely happy to hear this, scratching away at the table. Creature of habit. I know, bud. Me too. Me too. I hate change. But the decision was made, and certain items that they had accrued from Philip's time period and his sketched portrait were boxed up and carted off for the following week's meeting, and Al's card table was tucked neatly out of the way at the far end of his living room with a chair pushed to it. The session at the headquarters on the following week reportedly started off pretty slow, pretty reluctantly, just long enough to make them worry. But then it got rolling and everything was fine. Or so they thought. Earlier that night, as Al had been leaving his place to go to the session, he had said to himself, "Okay, Philip, well, you know, tonight's the night, and time to go to your new home." Locks the door, leaves. When he returned that night, he came home to an overturned chair and his card table across the room, wedged in his hallway. No evidence of a break-in. Door was still locked. Perhaps it was but a breeze. Or perhaps it was an example of Philip's growing abilities and another example of his willingness to step outside the boundaries of the intentions laid down for him by his creators. You see, Philip shouldn't have been able to disagree with group knowledge and was not supposed to do anything outside of the sessions. And according to the theory the Owens were testing and the guardrails they had laid down for him, he shouldn't have been able to. Now, by the end of 73, heading into 74, the group had been going steady with Philip. They all had a great rapport with each other. Things were poppin'. Communications were consistent and reliable. So, when they were approached by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in November to join them so they could get shots of a seance for a program they were filming called Man Alive, the group said yes. This would be their first opportunity to get Philip's antics on camera. And Philip came through. A star is born, baby. In front of the crew, he behaved just as they had come to expect him to, rapping away and table shimmying across the set. And at one point, the bright set lights were brought up, and it was mentioned by one in the group that if Philip didn't like the bright lights, he could just put one out if he wanted to. And as if on command, the table flipped to its side, feet pointing, and scooted across the floor towards the crew's lights, as if to bust him out. So, someone in the group secretly didn't like the bright lights. Philip was just being helpful. Philip's abilities would turn up another notch starting in early 74. Since he had proven he was a natural in front of the camera, the group decided to film a documentary called Philip the Imaginary Ghost. Near the end of January, at the end of a very long day of shooting, the table levitated for the first time. It was reported that all 4 feet came off the floor half an inch and floated a short distance. This took place in front of 2 independent witnesses, but unfortunately, the angle of the shot was impossible to capture by the cameraman in the short span of time that the table was off the floor. On another occasion, early that same year, during a regular session following this sustained effort by the group to get Philip to levitate the table, everyone was holding their hands inches from the top of it, encouraging him to touch it to their palms. Come on, Philip, touch it. They finally gave up. He wasn't going to do it. The group moved away from the table and sat around the room to just take a rest. With no one around it, the table made 2 small jumps and a rocking motion. This would not be the only or last time they reported Philip moving the table without hands on it. Philip had been known to playfully chase members around the room from time to time, and on one occasion it was reported that it literally escaped all hands and chased Dorothy across the floor. She escaped by squeezing through the door at the last minute, where the table promptly got itself stuck. Philip would once again, display spooky action at a distance. As you might recall, not something he should have been able to do. During a summer break the group was taking in '74, individual members reported some strange poltergeistic happenings taking place in their homes. It was prevalent enough for the group to actually consider meeting back up for a quick sesh in order to release Philip's pent-up energy. Another example of his spooky action at a distance, at least this time it was group-sanctioned. The group found on 3 occasions when they requested Philip to go visit any given member who was at home sick, that particular member reported hearing a loud, distinct rap, either in their room or on their bedstead at the same time the group made the request. Spooky weird, dudes. Now, shortly following the shooting of their documentary, Philip would have one more opportunity to strut his stuff on television, this time before a live studio audience. The program, which was broadcast over the Toronto City TV system, was called World of the Unexplained, and Philip's segment was moderated by the Reverend Lindsay King, Dr. Owen, and medical doctor and psychologist Dr. Joel Whitten. I know I haven't mentioned Joel once in this episode, but just for general information about this case, he did actually play a pretty big role in the overseeing of this experiment from the beginning. So, these 3 moderated the demonstration and were positioned on a raised dais above the group that was seated in the middle of the studio floor, sitting around the table. Philip was like, "Let's go big or go home, guys," and shot around the studio every which way, dragging these people at excessive speeds. But according to Iris Owen, Philip desired to be up where the panelists were seated on the platform and comically worked his way, remember I'm talking about a card table here, worked his way up 3 steps to get up on this dais before making his way over to the moderators, shimmying on up to the Reverend. The group asked the Reverend if he would say hello to Philip, so he placed his hand on the table surface, said hello, and was immediately answered with a very loud rap that reverberated from directly beneath his hand. The group would continue the Philip experiment until 1977, when the original members disbanded. They never did get to see Philip manifest, which was one of their original focuses for this experiment. But by the end, they had gotten more than enough evidence in their minds that some paranormal activity could be explained via psychokinetic means, and the consensus was, yes, they had created a ghost. In conjuring up Philip, Iris Owen uses ghost, thought forms, and poltergeist, not interchangeably, but from the sounds of it, or at least what I got from it, she may or they may have considered them to be more similar than they are different. All the result of the power of the mind. How that could be, they couldn't quite answer that. But maybe she was right. Maybe they were right. Maybe ghosts really are created in the mind. She included a short story of a haunting the society was actually able to solve based on their findings from the experiment. This family had found themselves plagued by a sudden onslaught of weird bumps in the night and rattling and raps. They then discovered a photo of the woman who had previously owned their house, and following this discovery began seeing the apparition of said woman. Multiple members of this family saw her. The society's investigators would explain their findings from the Philip experiment, and the family accepted to some degree that they might be collectively creating the activity. And once they did that, the activity ceased. No more haunting, no more ghost. Iris follows up this story, adding that the society didn't necessarily believe this one theory could account for every ghost and haunting, but that it was quite possible it could account for a large proportion. And here's where I'm a veer off, make my own way in this cold, cruel world. What I'm about to talk about is no crazier than a table that levitates or walks upstairs. I'm going to go on record, you guys, to say the society, as awesome as this experiment was and as important as their findings were for our pursuit for more answers, did not create a ghost. They just didn't. From all activity reported thus far, one might think poltergeist. Absolutely. I didn't even get to Philip's affinity for messing with lights. Let me do that right quick. So in Philip's room was a panel of lights. It consisted of differently colored bulbs, and the group could use them however they saw fit, set the mood and whatnot. These lights were controlled by a control panel where someone could switch them on and off. They could select the colored bulbs that they wanted on, and they could select brightness. So the group at some point arrived at the knowledge that Philip could flicker the lights, and he would do so upon their request. Not before, not after, but at their instruction. Well, there was one occasion where the light panel was already on, and it was adjusted to a setting that was more red than usual. During this session, it was suddenly noticed that the red seemed to be less all of a sudden, and the lighting was more pleasant. Upon investigation, the group found that the switch for the red bulb had been turned off, and when asked if he'd had a hand in turning it off, Philip responded in the affirmative. Now, taking all of the PK activity Philip was able to create into consideration, it really doesn't make him much different than a poltergeist, which can also manipulate the physical world in these ways. But I think it fits another concept a little better, though it is with a huge caveat, which has left me in a bit of a mental conundrum as to what it was this group actually created. My first consideration was that Philip's creation and existence sure does fit in nicely with that of thought forms, more specifically, the creation and existence of an egregore. I got very excited when I started seeing the similarities, and I happily went about my research, only realizing near the end the major problem with my theory. Egregores don't affect the physical world in the ways that Philip did. They affect it via people's emotions, will, and physical interactions with it. So I am back at the basic thought form theory. And I had to ask myself, okay, why? Why are you stuck on thought forms and not ghost, and why even divide the two? Because I look to patterns in behavior and random trivia information that applies. So maybe you guys can help me out to further explore this concept if this information so tickles your fancy. First, let's look at the 3 most common thought forms so you guys can see what I'm talking about when I mention the egregore similarity, and then I'm going to talk about patterns and random info, and then we'll see where we are. So there are multiple types of thought forms such as tulpas, servitors, fetches, even doppelgangers can be lumped into consideration. Let's look at tulpas and servitors. They are the most common, and then we're going to drill in on the egregore. The servitor is the easiest thought form to create. Basically, anyone can create one. Its very purpose is found in its name, derived from Latin, to serve. Servitors exist to serve. They are deliberately created magical constructs designed for a specific task or function. They are often described as psychic robots. These thought forms are to be used as tools rather than companions and will never gain any form of independence from their creator, unless that is part of their program. They are used for things like protection, influence of others subtly, or influence of certain tasks or scenarios, guardians in astral and magic work, guardians in the physical world. They can be designed to help you enhance your focus or creativity. There's a lot of use for the servitors. The servitor is created for a singular purpose, which you program into it during the creation process, and then, when it has completed the task or range of tasks that you've needed it for, it is destroyed or deconstructed. Servitors are created by separating specific aspects of an individual's psyche. They are mental entities. People will assign a visual to represent their servitor, like a sigil. I read one lady's story on Reddit where she kept her servitor in a dragon statue on her porch. She had designed it for protection of her property. Kind of cool. This other guy kept his in a quartz crystal. I don't think they're picky. So you're also going to give it a name and its defining traits, its very purpose for being. It is non-autonomous unless you design some form of autonomy into it. Proceed with caution, okay, you guys? Servitors are the less risky thought form to create, though can still spiral and present some lingering energetic clutter if you do not deconstruct them properly. They also can affect the physical world, though only if that is part of their creation. Again, they only do what they are designed to do. That's the nuts and bolts of it. There is more to it than that, so if you are in the market for a servitor, do your diligence in researching safety and best practices. What I'm telling you now and moving forward, and everything I've ever said on this show, for that matter, is for educational purposes only. The tulpa is derived from Tibetan Buddhism from a word I'm not going to try to pronounce that means emanation or manifestation. Tulpas were made popular in Western occultism largely by Alexandra David Neal in the early 20th century, who claimed to have created her very own, a jolly monk Friar Tuck kind of character. This tulpa was living alongside her at her apartment and then would start accompanying her on trips and treks. She said he could be seen physically by herself and then by others after a certain point. And then, as is reportedly a risk with tulpa creation, it took on a life of its own and would start doing some naughty things and acting on its own accord, so she ended up having to destroy it before it got out of hand. A lot of people have really taken the term tulpa out of context and ran with it. I am certainly guilty of that, not realizing just how, difficult it actually is to create one. And I am going to take a moment here in the show to correct a past usage of the term. In the season 1 conclusion, I deemed the Hat Man a tulpa. From current research, I'm putting a pause on that conclusion and now believe that to be inaccurate. Tulpas do carry a bit of risk to their creation, so it is very lucky for us that they are more difficult to create, and all of our thoughts aren't immediately popping out tulpa babies. You get a tulpa! You get a tulpa! According to occultist.net, an extraordinary amount of focus, discipline, and psychic energy is involved in one's creation. Monk-like levels of mental effort and discipline. An intense, sustained concentration on a very detailed visual and idea of what you are trying to create is necessary until the time comes when it becomes self-aware and autonomous. If this being is brought into existence, it will have sentience, personality, and independent consciousness. So if you do happen to have monk-like focus and intend to make one, consider the ethical implications of what you are doing, knowing that you may have to destroy it one day. Tulpas are meant to be a long-term coexisting type entity, but I'll tell you why this relationship might go off the rails momentarily. Ideally, the tulpa will have a deep emotional bond with its creator, which is great because one reason someone might create one is for companionship. They exist within the mind, but can be perceived as external. Though, according to David Neal, hers got so independent it was able to manifest itself to other people. The tulpa, like the servitor, is also created by an individual. Because tulpas are generally understood to reside within the creator's mental space, there is a fairly low to moderate risk of physical interactions, though it's not an impossibility according to some people's reports. And again, David Neal's story. Tulpas can go rogue for a variety of reasons, such as neglect, setting poor boundaries with it, or not defining its limitations. Overfeeding it can inflate its autonomy and power. If it is created by you during emotional crisis, it's not really going rogue at that point, but yeah, it can carry destructive traits and carry out destructive activities. Though there are instances where we might see it affecting the physical world or even manifesting physically when it shouldn't, the greatest damage it can do as your mentally created entity is on your own mind and emotions. Imagine a parasitic entity attachment. Total havoc, dudes. If it is grown bitter and resentful, if it's gained too much autonomy and growing out of your grasp, time to say goodbye to your tulpa. All right, egregores. It comes from the Greek word egregoroi, which means watchers or those who are awake. Egregore creation requires a group. It is both formed and sustained by the emotional and psychic energy and attention of the group. It has the ability to act independently. It grows more powerful with belief in it and attention given to it. And it can die if it's ignored or forgotten. It does also have the potential to go rogue. Egregores are created for a purpose and embody the collective will or ideas of its creators. They can be a risky endeavor and considered the most dangerous if they are allowed to evolve unchecked. Out of all of the thought forms, egregores have the highest potential for physical manipulation of the physical world, but again, this would be via their creators. They can, however, become quite powerful in their ability to manipulate them so. In La Cabale Pratique, author Robert Ambelain defined the egregore as a force generated by a powerful spiritual current and then nourished at regular intervals. Similar to memorizing every detail of a fictional backstory, familiarizing yourself with the intended entity's assigned time period, visualizing what he looks like constantly, and then communicating with him once a week for 4 years? Like that? In the philosophy of dark paganism, they are defined as an independently functioning spiritual entity created by one or more magic practitioners. Many egregores begin as thought forms, but then become capable of operating independently of the practitioners. Philip started subtly enough and then seemed to gain quite a bit more independence. So, at this point, I hope I'm making it clear why the egregore stood out against the rest of the thought forms. Let's jump to some patterns and random connections to other things. The physical activity created by Philip does appear similar to poltergeist phenomena. How is he himself different, though? Poltergeists, historically, are created by an individual unaware of the psychokinetic activity they are expending. The individual is usually young, female, under emotional stress, duress, illness, transition in their life. Philip was created via a group under jovial, playful conditions with the group consensus that he was kind, wouldn't hurt a fly, loved jokes, loved to laugh, etc. His similarity to the egregore is undeniable. Created by a group, sustained by the group, grew restless or weak when he didn't get adequate attention, for the most part fell in line with the will of the group, for the most part fell in line with the knowledge or expectations of the group in his answers, grew stronger in his abilities the longer he was sustained, and we could presume he died from lack of attention when the group was disbanded in 1977. I haven't heard of any Philip stories following, have you? And yet, he created physical phenomena, which is in direct contradiction to what is considered widely to be a mental-only entity. Now, I did find a strange connection that connects poltergeist phenomena to thought forms. It's been suggested by some in the paranormal and parapsychological fields that poltergeists may actually be the result of an unconscious tulpa or servitor, which would make the poltergeist a thought form in itself. One that, based on poltergeist cases that I have read, can act autonomously, but also can act based on their creator's commands, such as in the Jałasza Gajecki case that took place in Poland in the 80s, or the Fox sisters, if we want to believe their originating story. The raps were coming on command in response to the sisters' questions. As to a ghostly connection, this can be argued that in certain haunting cases, what people are experiencing is whatever this thought form is, but not a ghost. Zolar, in his 1970s book, The Encyclopedia of Ancient and Forbidden Knowledge, speaks of instances of family ghosts that are actually thought forms, while not dispelling the earthbound disembodied soul, as he calls it. These thought form family ghosts are kept alive by the family's belief and retelling of the story, generation after generation. But in Zolar's telling of it, these thought form ghosts do have an effect on the physical world. They can manifest and appear to the living to warn royal or noble families of approaching death or sorrow. They can be seen walking the walls of old castles on certain anniversaries. He goes on to say that many haunted houses can be explained in this manner. What do you think when you hear haunted house? Strange noises, rapping, footsteps, objects disappearing, furniture moving. Okay, well, he continues that the ghost doing the haunting can be laid by anyone familiar with the laws of thought forms. These are artificial entities made of human creation who obtain their mind and form via the thought force of their creators. And the repeated thought and belief keeps them alive and strengthens them. So, Zolar connects the idea that this human-created thought form can manifest itself to a physical extent based on belief and attention to it, resulting in a haunting what people think is the ghost of their house, while keeping it separate from the concept of an actual earthbound spirit. I'm trying to establish here the separation between a ghost and what the Owens created, while also examining the connection that I've stumbled on but not quite understanding between poltergeist activity and group-created thought forms that could at times appear to be a ghost that roams your basement because you believed it into being. Truth is, I have a really hard time accepting what the Owens created was an actual ghost. Because there are things that take place during reported cases of ghostly encounters that did not and could not be included in the Philip experiment. Synchronicity. Appearing to loved ones at the moment of their death, unbeknownst to their loved one. Or knowledge and information gained from a ghost that was not otherwise known. Which Philip did do that a couple of times, but we know Philip was never a real person. Information like who murdered them. We are doing an episode on that before the season is out. I can't wait, dudes. Or how about where family heirlooms or special lost items are hidden? The surprise factor. That's a big one. People are often minding their own business, not a care in the world, and are startled back into reality with the appearance of a phantom. The Owen group tried for a year with dedicated focus on getting something to happen. They were looking for a ghost, and it took them a year before anything happened. So, features of a ghost that could not be included in the Philip experiment because they were not creating a ghost. They were creating something extraordinary. Absolutely. It really speaks to the power of the mind and the collective mind that can also account for some cases of paranormal activity. Maybe he was a thought form that we just don't have a name for. Maybe he was a nice poltergeist, also a type of thought form. Or maybe he was a ghost, after all, and I'm wrong, and the experiment can explain the entirety of the paranormal. But I think if I left the episode at that, I'd swiftly receive stories from folks who've had encounters that directly contradict that idea. Actually, that's a pretty good idea. Let's leave it at that. Yeah, let's leave it at that. Send me your undeniable ghost stories, people. Prove me wrong. Come on, I dare ya. Speaking of which, I have a listener-submitted story, you guys. Woo! It's not about ghosts, but about an experience at Skinwalker Ranch. It is short, but kind of spooky. It's really good. I will share that in today's final note. The last thing I want to say before we close it, whatever the Owens created, whatever Philip was, it was real. The activity really happened. It's an extraordinary example of the power of the mind, what it can do, especially when we work together. It is also extraordinary because it's reproducible. Following the Philip experiment, another group at the Society created Lilith, a heroine of the French resistance movement during World War II, who was shot as a spy. She produced a lot of the same physical phenomena that Philip was able to produce, though her personality was distinct to her and in alignment with what that group had composed specifically for her. Then there was Sebastian, a medieval alchemist. Then there was Axel, a man from the future. Following the success of these experiments, a group in Australia created Skippy Cartman, a 14-year-old girl who communicated through raps and scratches. And then there's Humphrey of Oxfordshire, an upper-class son of an Anglican bishop who served in the Navy during World War II, who was created at John Moores University in 2004. Something profound is definitely happening in these cases. I don't know what, but it's documentable and reproducible. And apparently available to anyone willing to put it to the test. In closing, no matter what, the dots we can connect from the Philip experiment and the ones to follow is that conscious thought and intention have been shown repeatedly to translate paranormally into the physical world. Imagination and belief becomes real. Thoughts really do become things. So, be careful what you're putting out there in the thought sphere. Be mindful what you constantly give your attention to. And think twice about the beliefs you hold so dear. Your mind is more powerful than you think. And you might just create something that knocks hello. That is a wrap. Join me for today's final note. Last night, the wife and I took a trip out to Skinwalker Ranch, got a hotel in Vernal, Utah, drive back to the ranch and sit out there and start staring at the skies. And we see a little bit, but nothing earth-shattering. And then we hear this very loud and crystal clear meow. And we both look down the middle of the front seat, because that's where the noise is coming from. Then we hear the meow again, and it's coming from the middle of the front seat. Marianne says, "Is there a cat out there?" I look out the window. Nothing. I look back in the car. We hear the meow again. I look out the window. There's a kitten sitting right by my door looking up at me. I said, "Marianne, we have a kitty out there." She goes, "Oh, is it very big?" And I went to look at the kitten again, and it's looking me right in my eyes. It's a black tabby with yellowish eyes. And it disappeared right in front of my eyes. Needless to say, I will no longer be going back to Skinwalker. And if my wife wasn't there, nobody would believe me. Thank you, Mr. Lawrence, for your awesome story, and thank you for taking the time to submit it. Strange stuff do be taking place out there. Listeners, if you, like Mr. Lawrence, have a story you'd like to hear told on the show, or you just want to get in touch, message me at paranormgirlpod@gmail.com. You can also connect with me on social. Follow the show at paranormgirlpod for episode updates and upcoming live announcements. My posting has been so dang sporadic last couple of weeks. I do apologize. I've just been working a lot, my friends. I'm tired. Oh God, I'm so tired. If you enjoyed today's take on the Philip experiment, please leave a 5-star or thumbs up or a heart wherever you heard it. And Dave Zilla, special shout out to you, sir. It is because of our recent discussion I was inspired to look into thought forms and the Philip experiment. Listeners, I went live with Dave just a couple of weeks ago. You can catch that interview over on the PGP YouTube channel. It was phenomenal. And so is his book, Magical AI Grimoire. I highly recommend checking out both. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. I will be back with the next episode in 2 weeks. Stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.